Everybody. So what we wanted to talk about tonight is another form of distorted thinking. I'm actually really happy because this series has been doing pretty well, and it doesn't get as many views as some of the other things, but I do notice that people have much more emotional reactions and responses to them. I think when this kind of hits that button for somebody, when they feel like this is something that is true for them and something that is meaningful for their lives, I think it has a very high amount of weight for them. So today we're going to be talking about a term in distorted thinking known as mind reading. And I'll read this out and then we'll kind of talk about it a bit. Without their saying so, you know what people are feeling and why they act the way they do. In particular, you are able to define how people are feeling towards you. What do you think of when you hear that?
It feels a lot like trying to do that for survival, right? Trying to figure out like a lot of gut reactions around me.
Okay.
Like as a teen being like, okay, well now I kind of have to figure out what the fuck's going on and kind of like be all in the know. I imagine other people get into this one quite a lot differently than I did.
Yeah, when I think of this, I think more of the idea of projection. There's a tendency people have where because they have a tendency to sort of make meaning in their own head, and that's what they do. Human beings are meaning-making creatures. The reality is that they will see certain behaviors, make meaning out of them, and then believe this is the truth. Now, granted, this can lead to any of the other types of distorted thinking, but the reason why I want to talk about this one is because this is something that I see happen a lot in YouTube discourse. If you look at the responses I've gotten from Lily Orchard, most of them involve mind reading. Most of them involve a projection of what my intentions are, what my goals are, or even just the things that I did without actually watching the videos. Mind reading is problematic as a thing because as a form of distorted thinking, it sort of does create this problem where if you believe someone's feeling, thinking, or behaving in the way that you do, you then interact with them as that. But here's the trick. If they're not actually like coming from that place, that's where we're going to have conflict. Right? Like, if you walk into the situation reading the other person's mind and assuming you know all these things about them, that can be really problematic.
I think I remember a lot of people in my teen years running into this quite often.
Well, especially with adolescents, there's a big tendency on their part to there's a lot of sort of hypervigilance in the form of teen years, especially with like the invisible audience stuff. So there's a lot of tendencies for them to do this kind of thing.
Yeah, the other big example I was thinking was when you're working with kids. One of the things our bosses and stuff would remind people of, this is something we've talked, about in like camp training, is that you never know what's really going on with a kid. If, somebody's disruptive or they're acting out or they're cranky or upset, you don't know if they're just hungry or if, they're constipated that day. You have no idea what could be going on with this kid, right?
Yeah, Miss Postmaster said, I think of my mom. She does that all the time. She assumes malicious intent even when there is none. I especially find this frustrating because I have ASD, and often I do things that annoy her without realizing it, and she assumes I'm being malicious. This is a big part of this, and this is a thing that even we've had to work with in our home. There is a tendency human beings have to assume they know the intentions of a person. And so if someone does something that annoys you or bothers you or they skimp out on a thing they're supposed to be doing, the assumption is that they're doing this to hurt you. They're doing this to bother you. A really good example of this you'll see with, say, authoritarian parents. Occasionally you'll see some of the more like yelly, anxious types of authoritarian parents. What they'll do is they'll start saying things that are really biting and really like spiteful towards their young children, like, oh, he's just trying to do that to me. But that's the thing. they're projecting essentially on this kid capabilities that, depending on their age, they don't have. They're actually taking their own adult mind and projecting it onto the child, and the child's not having any of these thoughts. Generally, especially with young children, like he's younger than like 7-ish, it's all about needs. So the idea here that like you're supposed to, like you are immediately assuming that a kid is acting in a way because it's somehow malicious or because they're trying to hurt you, that's your shit. That's that parent's shit, because there's no way that's the case. And you see this in lots of other situations. You see it within drama, within certain communities, within certain things. There's a tendency to sort of project on somebody, and people act as though that projection is correct.
You've probably seen this with, teachers that you've had.
Mm-hmm. So I think the big thing here is to realize that, again, the problem with mind reading is this, and I think you've heard it in other discussions, and so I'll bring that up now. One of the big problems is that when we're talking about trying to understand something, we either can come at it deductively or inductively. Deductive would be able to prove the thing is there, right? You have very deductive, very clear evidence pointing to this thing. The problem is things like feelings, intentions, and etc. are not deductively provable. There's no way I can look inside your head and know what you're thinking. So I have to use inductive clues. But the problem with inductive arguments is that there's always the chance, always the danger that your personal shit will get mixed into that, and you will project something onto somebody that was not intended. Does that make sense? This idea that, like, you may feel like from an emotional reasoning perspective, right? We've talked about emotional reasoning before. An emotional reasoning perspective, that this feels right, that you think this is absolutely true. This must be what they absolutely are feeling. Do you know what I can say that absolutely is true for everybody in this chat? I guarantee you've done this shit with your partner. Full stop. Where they have done something or not done something, and there's an immediate assumption. Tiamat said, so it doesn't necessarily apply exactly, but Hanlon's razor is, do not assume malice where incompetence is an adequate explanation. It's true. There's some trouble there because the implication of incompetence, but it also accounts for things like lack of training and experience. I don't like the framing of incompetence because sometimes things are just forgotten. Sometimes a person just isn't, or sometimes a person just isn't being, mindful. I don't know if I always want to frame that under incompetence, because I more frame that as something to do with expertise, like someone being incompetent on a particular topic.
I think we got to get real clear when we talk about that, and make sure that we're being nuanced enough to look at the effects of that, right? If somebody forgot to give somebody, medication, right, as in that role, that's still going to cause a problem. That's not the same as malicious intent. But we still need to look at that with enough nuance to actually handle the situation properly, right? And looking at that as malicious intent versus, what needs to happen to correct the situation, prevent it from happening yet, are not the same things. Okay? That's what I had on that point.
Yeah, so the big question that comes up with these, and I think maybe there's a way that we need to maybe do like a synopsis video for all of these at some point. But one thing I want to make really clear is that each of these distorted thinking styles has a way that you can sort of sabotage it or get out of it. And the question with mind reading is always the thing I ask myself is, how do I know this to be true? If my only answer to something is emotions, then probably not. I need something stronger than that. So the question is with mind reading is, so let's look at what the person did. Let's say, for example, my kid forgets to take the dog out, the dog pees on the carpet. So if the dog doesn't go out, there's material harm there. The dog had to go to the bathroom in the house. The dog probably doesn't want to because they've been trained not to. So there is a material harm to this. Now the question is, was this done out of negligence, incompetence, as Tiamat mentioned, or was this malicious? Did they do this to the dog intentionally? Now, knowing they have ADHD and the like, I can go, okay, I don't really see them as a malicious person, so it's probably one of the other two. Yeah, it's the base. What am I basing this assumption on? Because I think the two thing is one, what is your data? And if you just have emotional reasoning, it just feels right. It's not good enough. Full stop. But also, what is the material harm? What has actually happened? What's actually been done? Because in a lot of cases, just like we talked about with the conflict is not abuse discussion, there's a way in which often people have this tendency to overestimate the amount of harm from a thing. Now, again, if you're mind reading, imagine that being something where, because you're mind reading and you assume all these negative and malicious intents, all of a sudden, you may interact with this person in a way where you've not only seen them as acting maliciously, but you may start thinking this way about many of their actions, if that makes any sense. Do you have any additional thoughts on that?
Trying to formulate stuff in my brain. Yeah, I think it is important to watch for the mind reading part in yourself because, like, are there going to be consequences to, that hypothetical situation? Yeah. Is this something that needs to be handled? But that's not, again, if you're getting stuck in well, they're doing this, for XYZ reason that may or may not actually line up with what's going on. It's going to get real problematic if you're treating this as a malicious thing, right?
Yeah, and here's the thing too, is this is the other thing. So besides looking at the material harm and what data points you have, here's the other thing that's going to be really helpful. And this is the same thing we've talked about with cancel culture or purity culture, right? What do you know about the person? So when we spoke about Lindsay Ellis's cancellation, one of the problems with the idea that she's a mask-off racist is that we know this to be untrue based on the videos she's created. The tendency is to look only at the tweet or these other negative things that have happened in the past. But if you look at her entire videography, you look at the entire videos on her channel, it's very hard to hold that argument. Ms. Postamaster said, I think people who gatekeep the LGBT community and tend to fall into the mind-reading behavior, as we saw earlier in the stream. Absolutely. What am I basing this assumption off of? Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it really does come down to this as like a clear thing is, we can never know what is in the other person's head. This is one of the fundamental existential problems of being human. And so the issue we get into is that there's always a certain amount of vulnerability or trust anytime we interact with anybody. One of the things I tell couples often when I'm working with them is the idea that you can never really know your partner. There's this belief that you can know them beyond a shadow of doubt, but there's a way in which you can never really know them inside their head. That would require you to essentially be them. And as such, you may have a pretty good idea what their behaviors would do. You have pretty good data as far as like on a day-to-day, but they can always surprise you. They can always change things. They can always go left when they normally go right. And the big issue here is that in a lot of cases where like it's really, really clear that fell out of my head.
God. Like we're both getting migraines.
Yeah, it happens. But understand this really clearly. The fact is that with mind reading is that what we're doing is assuming we can somehow know the other. Oh, I know where I was going with this. The fact is, I'm getting old. When you look at your partner, despite the fact that you know what they roughly could do, what their behaviors are, things like that, you can never actually know them. You would have to be them to be able to. In order to actually know something, you have to truly be able to be it. You can know things about it. You can know general actions, behaviors, things like that. But a way in which your partner is they're always, to some degree, a mystery. That might sound like spiritual bullshit, but it's really not if you think about it. This person that's sitting next to me is choosing to be with me. And at some level, I have to be vulnerable and open to the notion that they're doing it because of the reasons they've stated. I have to trust that. That's true with any relationship. There's always a level of not knowing. There's always a level of inductive reasoning going into these interactions. And so the problem being is that we have to be very, very careful about mind reading in our relationships because it often leads us into really bad places and it makes us assume the worst of people. And the thing I've noticed, actually, this is the thing that bothers me the most, is human beings have a really weird thing they do where you would think they would treat people they don't know worse. But the fact is actually people will treat a complete and utter stranger 1,000 times better than they would treat their spouse or their kid or their best friend. Intimacy, and especially very intense and very real intimacy, seems to be a thing that opens us up to be able to be more volatile, be more open with our emotions, be more upset. Social situations like work or a fundraiser or some other thing where you're expected to behave a particular way, we tend to sort of use those schemas as a way to prevent ourselves from acting in certain ways. But when you're with a person you trust, you tend to take those schemas off. You kind of take the mask off. I'm realizing the degree of which I struggle with this, and I'm uncomfortable.
Fair.
Mm-hmm. Notice that discomfort. There's a way in which you can never know the other person. You can never know their interiority. Like, their subjective experience, they can only ever report it. And again, like, existentially, that's just dead words. They're not really the experience. They only can point at the moon. They are not the moon. I think it's really important to go into interactions with this. Now, some degree of inductive reasoning is perfectly fine. There are ways in which we can figure certain things out. We just watched a video by the Quartering. We can tell based on his language, some of his rhetoric, this person is not a member of the LGBT. It's pretty clear that he is not homosexual or bi or pan, and it seems very clear that he's cis. A lot of his assumptions, including the thing of people should be in the closet, is based around those ideas. So I can make a lot of assumptions about the way he looks at the world based on the language that he's going over. Now, that assumption should be held lightly because he could always change things. But I still think inductively it's pretty easy to prove that he's sort of a right-leaning douchebag. Brittany said, I am the moon. Didn't you say earlier in the stream that you wanted to pee on the moon? I'm really confused, Brittany. This is getting weird. Let's see. King Artemis. I just assume people operate out of self-interest, not necessarily out of malice, but just inattentiveness personally, and that comes from my own self-consciousness about my role in given relationships. Yikes, dude. Fair. Brittany's getting kind of one of with all here. But here's the thing, though. Think about it like this. Don't kink shame the moon, Jess. I will kink shame the shit out of everybody. Fuck off.
What are we doing right now? God damn.
We're not kink shaming Brittany Moon.
Probably get back on track, friends.
No, I don't wanna. Anyway.
Well, there you go.
So here's the thing, like, this is another big part of this, and I think it's a thing to recognize, is that there's a really big stop kink shaming the moon. I will absolutely kink shame you.
We are joking.
Are we doing this on a shirt?
We are joking.
Are we doing this on a shirt? That'd be great. Stop kink shaming the moon. That'd be pretty pog. But anyway, so the basic point with this is that the problem with mind reading is it often is not based on real data. It's based on emotional. It's usually based on the worst interpretation because we immediately go into these situations. And I know you were joking. I was too. Meh. But that's the thing. We go into these situations. How do I change my nickname? I think you right-click on your name. But the fact is that looking at this mind reading is really important because I think it helps in relating. And I think it keeps you from it stops you from being more likely to sort of lash out at people for reasons that are more about you than them. Because either you feel emotionally right, you're somehow projecting upon them, or in some ways, the lack of not really knowing them, you just want to fill in that gap with whatever information you can. And often that information may be utterly full of shit. Does that make sense? Make sense to you?
Yeah. The thing I want to add, I think mind reading, one of the ways kind of get out of this is to get in the habit of just asking somebody why. And you can do this with the people close to you most easily, right? If somebody's on the internet, that's much, much harder depending on, what format. But you can just ask your partner, what was going through your, what were you feeling at the time? What was going on?
What was your intention?
What was your intentions, right? Any of those questions can be a way to actually, hear and understand what was going on. And hopefully some of that might be able to kind of cut through what's ever going on internally in you.
Yeah. So yeah, I feel like this is pretty well covered. Does this make sense, folks? Do you understand kind of what we're pointing at? This way in which we assume we know what the other person's doing, and often when we're in a very emotional state, we're actually probably pretty off. That's not to say we're always off. Obviously, in situations of abuse and things like that, you probably have way better data than that. I don't want to feel like anyone's gaslighting or shutting those types of people down. What I'm talking about is normally healthy but currently in conflict relationships, or just relationships in general. right? The big thing this says here is like dividing how people will treat you. The big part about this is that if you say something to yourself like, for example, well, if I go to this thing, I'm going to, make a fool of myself, and then everyone's going to judge me, and so I'm not going to go because I don't want to be judged. These things can actually prevent you from making connections. That's not great. Patricia said, in my case, I think when I mind read, or the closest to that I could think of in my own experience, what I tend to do is project my own negative self-views into someone else's mind and think that's what they think about me. Yeah, that's a huge part of this. That's the thing. When you get to a certain place in mind reading, what you essentially start doing is you start assuming that those people have the same judgments. And the weird thing is humans are a very sort of self-interested and often very distracted people. Like, the idea that these people are thinking about you that way is pretty unlikely, in all honesty. Ladybug, you said, God, this is so true. I have done this to my partner, like when I thought I knew exactly what she was thinking with a text, where there's a million possible factors I don't know about. I feel like no one would care about what I have to say. Sam, I absolutely care what you have to say. And to some degree, I think that's the thing, is people have to be open and willing to listen to people and hear that. Let me be super clear on texting. I'm going to be really clear on this. Don't. Just don't. Here's the real simple thing. Texting is for specifically sending information that is quick and effective. Did you pick up the bilk? That's a good text. Texting your partner your entire soliloquy of reasons you're mad at them is not. I can never see a situation where texting is ever useful in a conflict situation. I've heard some people claim that it's a good way to sort of de-energize it, but in most couples I've worked with, the fact of the matter is it just makes things worse, because without tone, without face, without context, it's so much easier to project on the other person.
Well, and completely misunderstand the tone, right? Like something that may be like a fairly minor thing might come across, as a massive thing over text. Text is so hard to read any of that or have any actual real gauge of any of that stuff.
Yeah. If your partner starts sending you a bunch of texts, dude, just don't read them. Be like, no, I'm not doing this over text. We need to do this in person, or video, or something where I can actually hear the tone of your voice and understand this. And here's the thing, Gabriel, we've all made this mistake. This is just built into us. Humans are meaning-making animals. We construct meaning out of everything around us. And there's a tendency, due to our social functions, to try to, in some way, sort of prognosticate how this person's thinking and feeling to sort of get the jump on them. But the problem is the reality in most situations, we're just not. We're just not going to be able to know. This is, again, why one of the things I think that was really great that I learned from my Zen master is the idea of just resting and not knowing. Rather than projecting on people a whole bunch of fucking meaning and shit that you think that they're doing or ways that they're going to judge you, don't assume anything. Go in completely blind. That might even be scarier, but that's kind of the reality. It's okay to go in scary. It's okay to go in blind. Obviously, there are circumstances where you probably shouldn't do that. I'm talking about more healthy or more, specific interactions. But what would happen if the next time you showed up to your partner, instead of projecting on them what you think they want or what you think their intention is, what if you just asked? One of the great ways to get rid of mind reading is actually active listening. If you're having a discussion with a partner, a child, a friend, I don't care. One of the best things you can do is slow it down. And the way you do this is, person one says something, what's going on in their mind, how they're feeling, and whatnot. Person two, before giving a retort, before answering anything said there, they reflect what they heard person one say. If they got that right, person one informs them, and if they got it wrong, person one corrects them. And once it's corrected, then they can respond. And then you keep going like this. It slows down communication a lot, but that's the point. There's an assumption every time someone opens their fucking mouth that you know what they mean. And the fact of the matter is that's just not true. I mean, again, look at ContraPoints. The aesthetic is absolutely about one character arguing performative theory, and motherfuckers jumped on it saying it was true scum because of their own projected fears. Tiamat said, I prefer to use text for the original purpose, quick communication that doesn't have to be responded to immediately. I agree 100%. Yeah, texting your fucking soliloquy about your emotions is not is not the bueno. No, it's not good. So does this make sense, everybody? Are you kind of getting this? Yeah, and again, Brittany, I agree. Like the idea that like you tell people how you feel. I mean, it's really good to be able to look at somebody and go, I felt really hurt by that. In that case, you're not even assuming their intention. You're just speaking of what's going on with you. Why do the mind reading when you can just say how you feel?
Right? Yeah.
Like if I accidentally bite Zena's head off, rather than them coming at me and being defensive, the more effective thing it would do to shut the situation down would be like, no, I felt really hurt by that, or I felt really bothered. In fact, that's one of the reasons why I think our fights end so quickly. We usually fight for like 15 minutes, kind of growling and being, irritable at each other. And then like 20 to 30 minutes later, we're usually making up because often.
I thought you were about to say making out.
That too. But the thing is that we end up like breaking through the communication barrier and start communicating more effectively. And we realize that either there was a stress, one of us dealing with mental illness that day, any number of things.
Any triggers came up. I mean, those just come up out of fucking nowhere sometimes. So.
So yeah, does this make sense to everybody? Is this jiving? Is that cool? Because I really want you guys to be able to use this stuff. The distorted thinking stuff is not just cognitive. It's there for the purposes of making sure that you guys are going into your relationships, going into your lives, without shutting yourselves down. If you want to think about it like this, each of the distorted thinkings is a fallacy. It's a way in which human beings shut themselves down and prevent themselves from being able to be their best. Mind reading is the problem because it's your anxiety taking over and essentially trying to make as much of a guess going forward. But the problem is these guesses are always completely based on your own negative thoughts. How many times have you projected what you think is going to happen at a social gathering? And it usually leads to either you're going to walk in naked or people are going to like judge you or you're going to say something stupid. It's because your insecurities are part of that projection. You're not actively making an inductive reasoning about what it is. But that's a thing. Ladybug Juices said, this has definitely helped contextualize a lot. Thank you. You're very welcome. Check out the rest of the Distorted Thinking series. Those fucking videos need more goddamn views. But they're important. This is really important. We're also getting down to the wire. There's only about 4 or 5 more of these on this list. I'm probably going to look around and see if there's any others that stick out to me. But the point of this system, the point of this discussion is to have as much of a way to combat these as possible. And I think future ones will be very useful to kind of think about that from that way, is how do you sabotage these? Right? So with that said, do you have anything else you want to add before we finish up?
No, I feel like that's pretty solid.
Okay. All right. So if you like the stream, please like, comment, subscribe. I really do like comments. I do read all of them once they're filtered.
Yeah, if you're watching this later, comment below. Tell us. We do read them.
Yeah. Also, again, likes super help. Sharing is really big, please. If you want to help us out and grow the channel and get a better camera so I'm not all wibbly wobbly over here, you could, in fact, donate streamlabs.com/transgirltherapist/tip. And you can also become a patron for as low as $3 or as much as $45. You can become a patron and get a whole bunch of fun things like possible stickers, a whole bunch of other crazy shit. Being able to come to like a gaming stream where we play Sentinels, maybe play some D&D. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff. So
lots of fun stuff.
Please check that out. We really do appreciate like any kind of support. And yeah. So again, thank you so much for being here. And King Artemis, thank you so much.
Oh, I missed the gift because it was behind the
Here,
mic.
I'll replay it.
Aw, thanks. I love those. I really do.
I told you I'd get the speed right on them. So, anyway, I love you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one, okay?
Night, everyone.
Bye.